At its peak, Rome was not just an empire. It was the world. For over 1,000 years, Roman law governed the courts of 3 continents. Roman roads connected 40 million people. Roman currency, the denarius, was accepted from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the cold northern shores of Britain. If you were born inside the empire's borders, you were born into the most sophisticated civilization the ancient world had ever produced. And then it was gone. Not overnight. Not in a single battle or a single betrayal. Rome fell the way most great things fall. Slowly, then all at once. And the reasons it fell are not buried in history. They are alive right now. In this country. In this moment. This is precedent. And today we are drawing the line. To understand why Rome collapsed, you first have to understand what made it extraordinary. Rome's early republic was built on a radical idea for its time, that no single man should hold absolute power. The Senate, comprised of elected representatives, checked the ambitions of generals and consuls alike. Laws applied, at least in principle, to citizen and senator equally. This balance of institutional power was Rome's greatest innovation, more significant than its legions or its aqueducts. The Roman economy was equally remarkable. At its height, Rome operated the ancient world's most complex trade network. Grain from Egypt, silk from China, tin from Britain. A Roman merchant in Ostia could speculate on commodity prices arriving from 3 different continents. Sound familiar? And Rome's military was unprecedented. Professional, disciplined, and loyal. Not to Rome the idea, but increasingly to the generals who paid them. That last detail is where the trouble begins. The fall of Rome was not caused by one thing. Historians have identified over 200 proposed causes over the centuries. But when you strip away the noise, 5 fractures emerge. 5 cracks in the foundation that widened over 2 centuries until the structure gave way. The first fracture was political polarization. The Roman Republic did not die in a single coup. It died in a generation of escalating political warfare. By the 1st century, BC, Roman politics had split into 2 entrenched factions: the optimates, who represented the elite landowning class, and the populares, who claimed to speak for the common people. Sound familiar? These factions did not debate policy. They destroyed each other. Assassinations, rigged courts, mob violence in the streets of Rome. The historian Sallust wrote that Roman politicians had abandoned the idea of a shared republic entirely. Each side saw the other not as a political opponent, but as an existential threat. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, he wasn't starting a civil war. He was ending a cold one that had been running for 50 years. The second fracture was currency debasement. Rome's economy ran on silver. The denarius, Rome's primary coin, was originally 90% pure silver. By the reign of Emperor Gallienus in the 3rd century AD, it had been debased to less than 5% silver content. The government, facing mounting military costs and a shrinking tax base, had quietly inflated its way out of its obligations. The result was a price spiral that devastated the Roman middle class, the small farmers and merchants who were the backbone of the empire's stability. When the middle class hollows out, the social contract hollows out with it. The third fracture was military overextension. At its maximum reach under Emperor Trajan, Rome was defending a frontier of over 10,000 miles. 10,000 miles of borders, requiring permanent garrisons, supply lines, and the constant deployment of legions far from Rome itself. The cost was catastrophic. By the 3rd century, military spending consumed roughly 75% of all imperial revenue. Infrastructure collapsed. Roads deteriorated. The aqueducts that had made Roman cities livable fell into disrepair, not because Rome lacked the engineering knowledge, but because it lacked the funds. The 4th fracture was income inequality. Rome's land, its primary form of wealth, became progressively concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. The latifundia system, in which large landowners bought out failing small farmers, created a permanent class of landless poor and an ultra-wealthy aristocracy that operated increasingly outside the rule of law. Tax burdens shifted downward. The wealthy used legal mechanisms, and illegal ones, to avoid contributing to the imperial treasury. By the 4th century, Roman senators were paying effectively nothing, while peasant farmers were crushed under tax obligations they could not meet. The 5th fracture was institutional erosion. Rome's greatest strength, its institutional checks on power, was dismantled slowly and deliberately by leaders who each had a justification for why their particular emergency required extraordinary authority. The Senate, once the counterweight to executive ambition, became a ceremonial body. Courts that had once been independent became tools of political enforcement. And perhaps most critically, the Roman people, exhausted by instability and crisis, stopped believing that the institutions could be fixed. They stopped participating. They looked for strong men instead of systems. The Western Roman Empire formally ended on September 4th, 476 AD, when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus. Most Romans barely noticed. That is perhaps the most chilling detail in all of Roman history. The end of a 1,000-year civilization passed without a defining battle, without a moment of reckoning. It had already been over for decades. The final fall was paperwork. Now, let's talk about today. The United States is not Rome. History does not copy and paste. But history does identify patterns. And the 5 fractures that dismantled the Roman Republic and Empire are not ancient abstractions. They are live conversations happening in this country right now. Political polarization in America has reached levels that political scientists describe using the same language historians use for late Republican Rome. Not policy disagreement, but mutual delegitimization. Each side no longer sees the other as wrong. They see them as a threat to be neutralized. That is not politics. That is the Rubicon moment. The dollar has lost over 97% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. The United States national debt now exceeds $36 trillion. Modern governments do not shave silver from coins. They print. The mechanism is different. The dynamic is identical. American military commitments currently span over 70 countries. The United States spends more on its military than the next 10 nations combined. The Roman Empire at its height spent 75% of revenue on military obligations. The United States currently spends roughly 60 cents of every discretionary dollar on defense and debt service combined. The top 1% of American households now hold more wealth than the entire bottom 50%. That ratio is not a political talking point. It is a measurable structural condition. The same structural condition that Roman historians identified as a primary driver of the Republic's instability. And American trust in institutions, Congress, the courts, the press, the Federal Reserve, is at historic lows across every demographic. When citizens stop believing systems can be fixed, they stop defending them. None of this means America's collapsing tomorrow. Rome's decline took 3 centuries. But the Romans who lived through the first generation of fractures, the ones who watched the political norms erode and the currency weaken and the institutions hollow out, those Romans did not think they were watching the end. They thought they were watching a rough patch. History's most important function is not to tell us what happened. It is to show us what is possible, including outcomes we would prefer not to consider. The Romans who built the Republic were not naive. They had studied the Greek city-states. They had watched democracies collapse into tyranny before. They built their institutions specifically to resist the patterns they had observed in history. And for 500 years, those institutions held. Then they stopped holding. The question Rome's story puts to every generation that comes after it is not, will this happen to us? The question is, at what point do the people who know the pattern decide to say so? That is what this channel exists to do. Precedent. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday. If this video made you think, subscribe. And share it with someone who needs to hear it. The past is still happening. We just haven't recognized it yet.